Coming up, we continue our look at the Brooklyn Nets taking on the Philadelphia 76ers as the playoffs loom on Saturday at 1 p.m. Today, focusing in on another key matchup of Tyrese Maxey. What can he do offensively, and how can Brooklyn attack him on the defensive end? We break it all down next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie. He's the owner-operator of DFSR for all your daily fantasy sports rankings. From DraftKings to FanDuel, he's got you covered. I'm Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast and your New Jersey Devils playoff bound on the Devils Puck Luck podcast. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We're free on all those great platforms. And tell you, today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. A championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. So for the parts that fit, head over to eBay Motors and look at the green check. Stay in the game with eBay's guaranteed fit, ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Eligible teams only. Exclusions do apply. And Doug, Tyrese Maxey could be a problem for the Brooklyn Nets. We've broken down Joel Embiid and how Nicholas Claxton will be pivotal there. We've broken down James Harden and why there are ways that the Nets can frustrate him. Is Tyrese Maxey, as we'll get into it here, as critical a component to the Nets having success in this first-round series as those first two players?
No, I don't think so. But it's interesting.
Lay that one up there for him.
Well, that's it's you phrased it in a way that's interesting. It is. So it's funny about how Maxey has sort of carved out a niche on the Sixers team, and it's funny because he's a really, really good player. Mm-hmm. And when you share the court with James Harden and and specifically Joel Embiid, everyone's role is so significantly reduced because those guys, I mean, specifically Embiid, and then we also talked at length about Harden. Those guys are such like suns that the rest of the teammates can orbit around that at some point, like there's just diminishing returns on what people can do. But it's a testament to how good the Sixers are that someone like Tyrese Maxey is like their third best player. He's a really, really good player. And when we talk about how the series kind of can unfold, you can start to see why the Sixers are such a problem matchup when Tyrese Maxey is their third best player. Like this guy is really, really good. So we'll go through some of the stats, and you watched a ton of film here, and there's a lot to break down, but I think it's just an important recognition again about what the Nets face when on day 3 of the breakdown, we're getting to Tyrese Maxey.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and I think sometimes in some ways that explains that's like as much of the story as anything else.
When last we saw Tyrese Maxey in a meaningful game against the Brooklyn Nets, the 101-98 victory, he was coming off the bench, although ultimately playing 34 minutes over the 14 minutes for Melton. But he put in 4 of 11, 4 of 4 from the field, had 4 rebounds, 3 assists, and a plus 17, though, on the plus minus with 12 points kicked in there as well. And it's funny, like that stat line in and of itself, I think is indicative of the ways that he can have an impact, right? He can shoot, obviously. The three-point shooting wasn't there 0 for 4. Can get to the line, can attack at the basket, and has that facilitator gene kind of in him. So the first thing that I think we look at here offensively is what it means if, to go back to yesterday's episode, which you can check out the full breakdown of James Harden. If James Harden is on the ball, where is the risk with Tyrese Maxey on the floor? And when I went back and watched that game and a couple of others, his walk-up ability into walk-in threes is pretty darn smooth. And if we're talking about setting the table where James Harden, you want to force that ball out of his hands, you want to make him play off ball, the problem I can see the Nets running into is if you're allowing Maxey to drift off on that left wing like I watched so many times and just kind of be the forgotten player, like when we're getting to him on day 3 of the breakdown, you could see him really just starting to rain down from the outside in a way that'll be hard for the Nets to counteract to and then not fall into the other problem, giving James Harden all the space in the world to operate.
Yeah, so at times, I'm totally with you. At times, you will see Maxey relegated to more corner duty when he shares the court with with Harden and Embiid. We did see it. We've seen it a lot this year and last year. Is that he is a really good baseline cutter from that position. If you lose track of him, like he's super fast, and if you lose track of him on the baseline, it's actually you're a little less worried about the corner three as you are about him just getting to the basket. Because if you bring help on Embiid, or you bring help on Harden, like Maxey starting from that corner spot, especially like weak side corner, like he can just get to the basket really, really fast, right? And so like that's one problem. And I think you mentioned it too, him being in the step into very, very fast player, you need to be able to eliminate him in transition too, right? Like, because this is going to be critical for the Nets to get back on misses. Like the Sixers don't have great transition players. Like, Embiid is not a transition guy really. And just like their wings aren't like this, but Maxey's really, really good in the open court there too. So sort of mitigating his speed whenever possible is going to be pretty critical for the Nets, because again, like having a guy of this caliber as their third best option does present like super difficult challenges that the Nets are like kind of equipped for, I think, with him. All right. But for sure, like it can be problematic.
Yeah, there's one part of his game, the part of his game, but the measurables, right? He's 6'2". So, when we always talk about the Brooklyn Nets and having issues potentially from a size standpoint, you go, hey, we'll take a lot of these matchups where we're still going to have length against you when it comes to the defensive end of the floor. But when you talk about the idea of setting up the perimeter shot and then being able to take you off the dribble, the switching defense for Brooklyn, to me, that's where it's going to become interesting, because we know that James Harden, we talked about this when he was on the Brooklyn Nets. He will play at pace in transition. He doesn't necessarily want to, but he has the ability to do it. And when you have that risk of his step back three in his bag, I think the concern for me is when the Nets switch defensively and you think you can settle into this idea that the look is coming from the outside, that's when, if the matchup is right for Philly and wrong for Brooklyn, getting the ball into the hands of Maxey and maybe taking a bigger, slower defender off the dribble, baseline or otherwise, is going to potentially become a repeatable process until the Nets counterpunch the other way.
Yeah, for sure. And again, this is something to keep an eye out for, because while and we'll get into some of these there's a couple interesting stats here around some of these combinations, but something to keep an eye on here is not, and you would hope the Nets kind of are in the same boat here, as you said at the beginning, not forgetting that he's available, that he's there, right? Because you will watch the game tape on this and you will kind of have to go find them at times, right? Which is the problem with sometimes for Philly, is when he's in the starting lineup, it's just going to be hard to get high usage. I'll go through some of the usage numbers here in a bit, but it's going to be hard to find high usage. But again, as just a third reminder here, it could be easy to get complacent around this matchup because he's not ball dominant in this current scheme.
Right.
And then like all of a sudden, but he can go for 30, right? Like if given the right set of circumstances and matchups.
And coming up here in a second, we're going to talk about also what it means for the defensive assignments for Brooklyn and how maybe the Nets can counterbalance that by making Tyrese Maxey work on the defensive end. But to your point, it's going to be tricky if you think you're checking one or two boxes, and it's why this is a hard matchup. All of a sudden, Tyrese Maxey going for 30, is that the, quote, best of the bad situation? Maybe, but it's not going to feel any better if he's the guy that's burning Brooklyn in this first round.
All right, for a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you'll be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Add your ride to the My Garage and look for the green check to know if the part will fit, or you're going to like this one, your money back. Just because, like a sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
Okay, so the other part of his game that I want to get to here is when he's actually on the ball. So first, we're describing all the ways in which you can forget that he's on the court, and he can maybe be taking you off the dribble. He can be walking into threes, all that stuff. Okay, but the other thing that I watch when you go back is, especially on misses, and you mentioned Philadelphia is not necessarily a team built for transition basketball. But man, did it jump out when I think it was a Cam Johnson missed three-pointer. Maxey ends up getting the rebound kind of in the middle of the paint there. And he three-quarter courts after 2.5 dribbles to Joel Embiid, who was in the paint down the other end. He has the court vision, and he has the finesse when it comes to the passing game. And I think that's the area where, to tie it into the James Harden angle of it, okay, we think we can trust these one-on-one assignments, get the ball out of his hand. Maxey is just as adept at setting the table for others. And I think that's arguably my biggest concern with him right now, is the ball in his hands and letting James Harden play off of that, letting Joel Embiid play off of that, because now all of a sudden you can do the double down when it comes to getting switching defenses, setting double pick and rolls, those drag screens that you talk about a lot over the back end of the season for Brooklyn, where all of a sudden James Harden is actually on the third matchup now. And now you're really putting yourself in a hard spot on the defensive end. Like, that jumped out to me maybe even more than some of the offensive game for Maxey.
Look, anytime you have a secondary ball handler in your offense that is very dangerous, it poses really, really significant challenges to the opposing defense. And so I'm going to he's a distributor, but I'm just going to call him like a really good on-ball guard, right? That's what Maxey, would we agree that's like a good, sort of like combo guard. It's like not necessarily a point guard, but is just like super live on the ball, really quick. When you have guys like that in your lineup, especially when they're like next to James Harden, it becomes really problematic when you look at the spacing of the court, because one, you can't really allow him to operate freely around the perimeter. Like you were mentioning times where you saw Maxey get really dangerous. Like a lot of the time is because his defender needs to stay tied to him, especially like above the break, because those are going to be situations where the court's really going to just going to be open up. Like, look at the Nets as an analog. The Nets really don't have a secondary ball creator.
I was going to say, he'd be a nice fit. Be a nice fit for the Brooklyn Nets.
I mean, kind of. Yeah, like this is why people, in some ways, want Cam Thomas to play tons, is because they probably see some versions of like these guys being sort of alike. I don't think they totally are, but there's a squint and you can see it, like elements to their game that are kind of overlapping. When you have that guy, it creates just such mismatches, and then facilitation for a guy like Maxey gets easier because he's not going to get double teamed, right? He's going to be facing like the third best or fourth best defender that you have in the lineup, or just like times where DFS is hiding him in the corner because like where they choose to position him. So this is where these guys can get just super dangerous and super live. It's why these actually, the combinations of these lineups are I mean, the numbers are kind of incredible when you look at the combo deals with these guys. But part of that is because, I mean, it's because of Harden and because of Embiid, but also, like you said, when you have this kind of guy off ball for you, and that player's okay with being off ball and like just sort of drifting until its time is right, man, there's going to be a game where where people are going to say something like what you said, which is like, Maxey would be a pretty good fit over here.
Yeah.
like right.
And it'll tie into your thing of like, Maxey would be a really good fit over here, and the Nets you could maybe counter it by having Cam Thomas get some minutes, right? Like, it's going to be the both and from a Brooklyn Nets fan base who's clamoring for that type of player and feels like they maybe have one that exists. I will say, so here's what I think is interesting about this particular matchup. Before we talk about how the Nets can attack him on the defensive end, it's funny. We keep referencing back to that last meeting, the 103-98 game. Remember, that's the first game for Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson for the Brooklyn Nets. Spencer Dinwiddie had a couple underneath his belt. And the reason why I bring it up is there's a world here where the problems that Maxey presents do get mitigated by the fact that you have a very different looking team than you previously would have going into those matchups. Like, you can go back and look at that box score and say 34 minutes, the plus minus is absolutely electric because they come back late in that game to get the win. But 4 of 11 from the field, there's some rebounds, there's some assists. It's not, 12 points, it's not crazy. But you do have the length of Spencer Dinwiddie. You do have the versatility of Cam Johnson. You do have Mikal Bridges now. You know that Nicholas Claxton, even in those insane switches where he ends up on a guard, can still hold his own. Like, if I want to go positive, because I feel like we're just setting what could be a negative table here, it's that the Nets have more than enough guys to hold their own against Maxey and take him out of this equation in a one-on-one scenario. The question is going to become, how often can they afford whichever assignment you want to put there? Let's say that it's Spencer Dinwiddie and you have Mikal Bridges taking on the James Harden assignment. How often can you just let him stay at home, and trust the results, live with the results, and then afford yourself the ability to stay focused on Harden, to stay focused on Embiid and the other problems that are going to be presented. Because once you feel like Maxey has become a problem, you actually probably have 3 or 4 more issues that are already presented themselves in a game.
Yeah, and look, if you break down just like the overall minutes with these guys together this year, it actually just it brings together all of the points that you just made about why it is so hard, because about why this particular combination of players is very, very difficult. Even with Max, I mean, they moved him in out of the starting lineup because they were starting Melton for a little while. He's kind of back in the starting lineup now. I suspect he starts. I mean, I guess there's a world where they could start Melton. I don't think they will, but because when they were live at the end of the game, at the end of the year, Maxey was starting. But that particular problem of having this guy as your third option. So these guys played 366 minutes together this season. They're starting 5. So Harden, Embiid, Maxey, and then throw in Tobias Harris and PJ Tucker. That combination had 123.5 offensive rating and a 111 defensive rating. Like, that's so sick.
So it's like it makes you sick.
It makes it really, really hard. And by the way, when you just take off the wings, like, and be like, oh, does the defense get so much worse? 734 minutes of just Harden, Embiid, and Maxey, 123 offensive rating and 113.5 defensive rating. Did they get worse on defense? Yeah, a little bit. It doesn't matter. It's like 10 points per 100 possessions. They're just crushing people. And this is because these dudes are just super, super hard to scheme against, because you can devote your resources to one, and you can devote, 3/4 of your resources to two, and you just have this other guy out there that just is kind of a killer too. Right?
Who, if you, and then it's really, this is probably the first time in our previewing episodes here where I'm like, not loving having to go into this matchup. Because,
by the way, real quick, sorry to interrupt. It's not, you said this before, it's not negative, by the way. It's just realistic. Like, this isn't trending negative. I know people want to say it that way, see it that way sometimes, because, and I know why you would, and I would too, be wanting to say it like that, because it does sound negative. It's not negative. It's just realistic. This is the number. Like, these are the numbers. Like, some teams are really good when they're playing combinations of players. Nets had this too. When they had Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden on the court, the numbers were freaking ridiculous. Right. Sometimes it's not negative to think that it would be tough to beat those teams. It's just realistic. So anyway, I just wanted to define maybe what the realistic nature of this is.
No, and you're probably right in the sense of, like, remember, like, this is what the Brooklyn Nets are doing. This is what the coaching staff is doing, right? They're not talking about it and saying, oh boy, it's going to, we have a real negative possible outcome here. It's, hey, this is what this player does well. This is what we need to be aware of. This is what we need to watch for. And these are the ways, by the way, that we can attack and force the issue back in their direction. And that's something that we'll talk about coming up here, where I think that Maxey is exposable for the Brooklyn Nets, where they can turn that into a plus matchup. And I'll cap it off just by reminding everyone that this is a player who, if you want to talk about, like, where's the value gone, remember, from his rookie season to this season, he's now a 43% shooter from beyond the arc, averaging 6 attempts per game here. He's been 48 from the field, and he gets to the free throw line 3.5, 4 times a game and knocks it down at a consistent clip. It's all of those things that come together to say, depending on how you approach defending Maxey, he's going to have the ability to still impact the game in a lot of different ways. It's why it's going to be difficult, but not something that the Nets can't manage, and we'll break down how coming up next.
All right, before we get into that, I'm going to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We got a bunch of different sports going on right here. We got MLB fully in action with all the different stats you could ever believe going on, and it's really been increased with the new rule changes here for MLB, and obviously NBA heading into the playoffs as well. Get started on FanDuel, because new customers are going to step up to the plate or get to the rim with a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. If you go to FanDuel.com/locked on, you sign up, you place your first bet, and you get up to $100, or not $100, you get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if you don't win. Right now, you can take a look at some of the stuff they have going for this series. You can go Brooklyn Philly series top point scorer right now. Now, it's going to be Embiid -900, but right behind him, +800, Mikal Bridges. You think the scoring maybe evens out a little bit between Embiid, Harden, and Maxey, and all of a sudden Bridges goes to the moon? I can see it happening. +800. It's just a little taste of what all the different ways they break this down over on FanDuel. Right now, you go over to FanDuel. Don't miss out on that no sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/locked-on to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball and the NBA.
Okay, so as we've done over the past couple of episodes, we've laid out all of the ways in which and the skill sets that different players for Philadelphia can present problems for Brooklyn. Let's go the other way, though, because the one area that I thought in watching that last game and some of the other tape on Maxey is there are instances, specifically in the 101-98 loss for Brooklyn back in February, where once you get into switching defenses, Maxey often found himself in the corner, just kind of having a body on a DFS, having a presence around someone. Now, that doesn't mean that what we should be thinking is, let's go ahead and design plays where we get switches and put the ball into DFS's hands. But the action off of that, I think, actually can give a bit of a blueprint of how the Nets can continue to attack that. Because once you bring Maxey out of the way, who is a 6'2" off-ball guard, on-ball guard, all of the sudden, the quickness advantage swings in the way of Brooklyn. I can make a very strong case that you could put anybody in front of James Harden, whether it's Mikal Bridges, Spencer Dinwiddie, Cam Johnson. All three of them should be able to put the ball on the deck and take James Harden towards the rim. And on top of which, in the switchable offense, if it's not James Harden, in this instance when I watched it was Cam Johnson. I can't remember who was defending against him. Might have even been Tobias Harris. The access to the lane was easy, it was quick, and it was decisive. So the way in which I think you counterbalance whatever Maxey is doing offensively is expose him defensively. We talk about it all the time with Brooklyn. The switching, you want to pick on Joe Harris? Guess what? We're going to try to pick on Maxey here, especially in the mid-range game, even when he's on those defensive assignments. Mikal Bridges can expose him in the mid-range game, as can Spencer Dinwiddie, as can Cam Johnson. I'm lumping those three players specifically together to say you need to go to work when you have him on you or when he's pushed to the corner and basically relegated to a neutral role on the defensive end.
Yeah, they're going to have to bring out some of these guys into screening actions to be able to try to take advantage of this. Look, the Sixers have like sort of this just cheat code because they have Embiid that backs up, that kind of cleans up a lot of these mistakes. Like you can live with poor guard defense when you have an absolute defensive force behind you in Joel Embiid, even on a drop, right? Like, because it's just going to be really hard. It's going to be a really difficult thing. And PJ Tucker, we know, is a really willing defender. Also, luckily, Tucker's skills aren't as problematic for a team like the Nets. Like he's really good about like these like big aggressive wings. And that's not necessarily his game. I actually wonder if we see like a little more D'Anthony Melton and guys like that in this matchup. But I agree with you in trying as much as possible to take advantage of these guys. And I think where you're going to see that happen is the Nets have to bomb threes. Like they have to bomb as many. They really just have to bomb threes the entire series here and just live with the results. They have to take, 40 is a lot. They have to get up like 35 attempts. Like they need to get a ton of threes because that is where you can take advantage of the lack of defense. Like that perimeter defense for Philly with guys like Maxey and guys like Harden is just not going to be up to the task as much. And we know that getting into the lane is going to be a real problem. Like the Nets are going to have a hard time at the rim here. Like that's just because Embiid is so good, but this is where you take advantage. You try to get in Maxey and Harden into these actions and sort of live with the results. You can rise and fire over him for sure. Right. And the Nets have a few of these guys that can do that. Like Mikal can do that. Cam Johnson can definitely do that. And they're just going to have to like, you're going to have to just probably put up threes in slightly disadvantageous spots because the next thing down on the shot creation ladder is much worse, like getting into Embiid in the lane or something like that. Yeah. So I think Maxey being undersized is part of where we need to just see an unhealthy diet of 3-pointers.
Yeah.
Right. Like it needs to be like all, not every possession, but man, a ton.
And it's funny because tomorrow, I think, which will be our Friday episode, to be the final preview of this series. I think we're going to talk kind of at a high level. What are the things? The 3-point shooting is going to be one of those. But I will just throw in at the end here, before I bring up something that you were taking the pulse of the Brooklyn Nets fan base on heading into this series, is that if you can, because I mentioned watching the play where it ends up being Maxey on DFS in the corner. Hey, guess what? Stay mobile. You know what I'd like to see if you need to rain down threes? I can not live with, I can like and nay love having Joe Harris ending up being in the corner and saying, you're there for the spot up look, and it is Maxey that gets switched on to you. You can rise up over top of him. Like, you have that size advantage there that doesn't necessarily have to present the issue of Joe Harris with the ball in his hands, and you have a quick, smaller defender. Now you're just holding it. You're trying to get it out. You're trying to extend the possession and getting yourself back into the issues you talk about, going into the teeth of the basket late in the shot clock when you know you have Embiid waiting there. So there's things off of this, and I think we'll get into some of those lesser players. PJ Tucker, by the way, I mentioned him in the Nick Claxton coverage because it was PJ Tucker is this exposable thing that needs to be happening in the background. I did the 1-2 in those segments where I thought whoever's on him offensively, you got to expose him. The guy's 39 years old, 60 years old, 73. He's going AARP. They need to beat up on him. Like, he's not the same player he once was, and maybe we'll get to that a little more tomorrow. But the last thing was where you thought. You asked the fan base, what is success going into the series? And I think I was mostly pleasantly surprised with the attitude of the fan base, minus a couple of outliers who had some fairly aggressive ideas about what Brooklyn needs to do.
You know, I think I'm going to save this for tomorrow because I found this really fascinating. And it was we intended to talk about it today, but we're going to do a sort of a series recap going into Friday here. So I think it's actually better to save this. I will say, there was a lot of different answers on this one. And I'd encourage you to think about this going into Friday's episode, like what it is you think is the definition of success for the Nets here. Because I tried to phrase it in a way, by the way, give at Adam Armbrecht a follow on Twitter, give at Doug Norrie a follow on Twitter too. He's sitting there in the bottom of YouTube if you want to see some of this stuff. But I tried to frame this question, and I'll frame it in a way now that I think is okay, it leaves it open to interpretation. Okay. The interpretation here is like, what is your definition of like success? Like, what would be a successful series in your mind for the Nets in this one? Is it, and there's so many ways to slice this because, and it was pretty impressive to me actually. What I, look is 50 Nets responses on Twitter, like the pulse of the fan base. I'm not sure, but it's like not a bad sample size. And I was really impressed that the range of answers here was a lot wider than I thought it was going to be. And it got very specific. It got it down to the player level on some people's answers.
Yeah, and I actually, yes, without giving it away. So they call it a tease in the business, and arguably an extended tease. But when we talk about it a little more in depth, I was impressed by some of the responses and the way in which I think it impacted your thinking on it around expectations. So when we dive into it tomorrow, it'll be fun because there are, I don't know, no less than 33 outcomes that I could be satisfied with. And there's probably like 3 or 4 that would really disgust me, right? And everything in between there is going to be fun to watch starting on Saturday, but we'll start breaking that down tomorrow.
And just to put a pin on that, the reason it's like different than in years past is because really anything less than like getting to the championship was a disappointment, right? Now,
right.
like
a whole new ballgame now.
But now the Nets range of outcomes on just sort of our emotional meter is much different now. And actually, I think the range is much different even among the fan base, because I'll tell you what no one said: win the championship. Okay, so there, if you like, no one even thought of that as a realistic outcome. It's not realistic, so whatever.
Sweet, but
I just would
sweep the Sixers.
Well, there was a couple of those. We
can expose those ones. They won't be a big part of.
No, so anyway, I challenge you to think about what you as a fan out there, right along with us, thinks as an acceptable or disappointing or a fruitful outcome from the series. We'll get into that more on Friday. In the meantime, give us a follow on Twitter. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube.
And of course, my friends, a man armed with a rhyming dictionary is a dangerous man. Why, that's Buck Springfield.
No, what are they all?
Bruce recognize it. But I was having some, we're doing a little thing there.
One of the all-time great poets. We will be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.